They signed the orders, others died, and when the war ended, they went home. In courtrooms at Nuremberg, the world watched justice unfold. Cameras flashed, judges read verdicts. Some of the most powerful men in Nazi Germany were sentenced to death. But outside those courtrooms, beyond the headlines, thousands of officers who carried out Adolf Hitler's criminal directives were never punished. They commanded firing squads in the east, they approved deportation transports, they enforced policies that turned towns into graveyards. Their signatures are still preserved in archives. Typed names, official stamps, military seals. After 1945, many claimed the same thing. We were just following orders. Some were tried, some were convicted, but many were released early, and many were never charged at all. They returned to civilian life, to business, to government offices, to quiet neighborhoods. The war ended. Their lives did not. So how did this happen? How did men who helped execute one of the most systematic killing machines in history walk free? What trials never took place? And what choices, political, legal, strategic, allowed justice to stop short? Tonight, we look beyond the famous trials and into the silence that followed. To understand how so many officers avoided punishment, you first have to understand how the system worked. Nazi Germany was not chaos. It was bureaucracy. At the top stood Adolf Hitler, issuing broad ideological directives: eliminate enemies, secure territory, cleanse the Reich. But Hitler did not carry out these crimes personally. His orders moved downward, through the Oberkommando der Wehrmacht, the Armed Forces High Command, through the SS hierarchy led by Heinrich Himmler, through regional commanders, police chiefs, and administrative offices, typed memoranda, stamped documents, distribution lists. In June 1941, as Germany prepared to invade the Soviet Union, one directive made the chain of command unmistakably clear: the Commissar Order. It instructed German troops to execute captured Soviet political commissars immediately, without trial. The order was signed at the highest levels of military command, it was transmitted down to field units, and it was carried out. At the same time, special SS mobile killing units, the Einsatzgruppen, followed behind advancing troops in Eastern Europe. Their task was explicit: eliminate Jews, political officials, and other targeted groups. But even these killing operations required coordination. Transportation schedules, fuel allocations, reports sent back to Berlin detailing numbers executed. This was not random brutality, it was organized. Officers received instructions, they acknowledged them, they implemented them. Some protested quietly, most complied. Because in Nazi Germany, obedience was law, and refusal could mean removal, arrest, or worse. By 1942, deportations to extermination camps were being coordinated through a web of ministries, rail authorities, and regional commanders. Meetings were held, minutes were recorded, lists were prepared. The machinery of destruction moved on paper before it moved on the ground. And every document had a name attached, a signature, a rank, a date. When the war ended in 1945, those papers did not disappear. They became evidence. But evidence alone does not guarantee justice. Because the question would soon become, who exactly was responsible? The man who gave the order? The man who signed it? Or the man who carried it out? When people think of Nazi accountability, they think of the men in the dock at Nuremberg. Some of them were punished. Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel, Chief of the Armed Forces High Command, signed criminal directives, including the Commissar Order. At trial, he argued he was a loyal soldier following his leader. He was convicted and executed in 1946. But not every senior officer faced the same fate. Field Marshal Erich von Manstein commanded forces on the Eastern Front. Units under his authority cooperated with mass executions of Jews and civilians. In 1949, a British military court convicted him of war crimes. He was sentenced to 18 years in prison. He served 4. By 1953, he was released. Later, he advised the West German government on military matters. To some, he became known not as a war criminal, but as a brilliant strategist. And then there were the others. SS regional commanders, police battalion leaders, administrative officials who organized deportation trains. Many were briefly detained, some were investigated, Large numbers were never indicted. They returned to civilian professions: law, business, civil service. Some changed nothing about their names or identities. Their defense was simple. They had followed orders. They had operated within the law of their state. They were cogs in a machine. But those cogs signed papers that sent thousands to their deaths. The system depended on them. And after the collapse of Nazi Germany, the world faced a problem it had never encountered before. How do you prosecute a crime committed by a system when that system had millions of participants? Some officers stood trial and paid with their lives. Others stood in courtrooms briefly, and many never stood in court at all. The line between punishment and freedom was not always drawn by guilt alone. The orders were clear. The consequences were deadly. From Berlin, instructions flowed to the front lines. They were signed, stamped, and logged. Proof of both authority and compliance. Take the Einsatzgruppen, the mobile killing units operating in Eastern Europe. Their mission: eliminate Jews, communists, and other groups labeled as enemies of the Reich. They followed strict schedules, recorded numbers of victims, and reported directly back to SS headquarters in Berlin. Meanwhile, Wehrmacht officers executed the Kommissar order, identifying and murdering Soviet political officers without trial. Reports from the field confirm that entire towns were terrorized, communities destroyed, families wiped out. Even administrative officers, sitting in offices far from the front, contributed. They organized transport trains to concentration and extermination camps. They kept lists, issued permits, and ensured the machinery of death ran smoothly. These atrocities were neither random nor chaotic. They were bureaucratically coordinated, meticulously documented, and ruthlessly executed. Yet, for every order carried out, there was a signature. A name, a rank, a responsibility. And here lies the paradox. Some officers signed and executed orders that led directly to mass murder. Some reported the numbers with meticulous care. And when the war ended, many faced no consequences. The machinery of atrocity was vast. But the machinery of justice after the war was limited. The question lingered in the minds of survivors and investigators alike. Who would be held accountable? And who would quietly return to civilian life, leaving the evidence behind as silent witnesses to their deeds? After 1945, the world expected justice. The Nuremberg Trials set a precedent. Top Nazi leaders, those at the very peak of power, would be held accountable. Some were executed. Some received prison sentences. Their crimes were undeniable, but the system could only reach so far. Tens of thousands of officers, bureaucrats, and mid-level commanders were implicated in the machinery of murder. The very people who implemented Hitler's criminal orders day after day. Evidence was often incomplete, witnesses were gone, and political priorities shifted quickly. By the late 1940s, the Cold War had begun. Western powers wanted a stable West Germany as a bulwark against the Soviet Union. Prosecuting every officer risked destabilizing the new ally. In West Germany, denazification programs initially removed former Nazis from public life. But over time, many were reinstated in government, law enforcement, and business. Cases were dropped. Investigations stalled. Some officers faced trials decades later. But many had already died or faded into civilian life. Even for those tried, sentences were often light. Field Marshal Erich von Manstein, responsible for units committing mass killings, was sentenced to 18 years, served only 4. Others were quietly acquitted or released. Justice in many cases was partial at best. The contrast was stark. Some perpetrators faced the gallows. Others returned home, free and unpunished. It was not a failure of law alone. It was a failure of capacity, politics, and human compromise. And for the survivors, the question remained: how could men who helped orchestrate one of history's greatest atrocities walk free while others were executed? The question of why so many Nazi officers escaped punishment cannot be answered by looking at individuals alone. The truth lies in the system itself. Nazi Germany was built on rigid hierarchies. Orders flowed downward, and obedience was expected above all else. Disobeying could mean imprisonment, demotion, or even execution. This culture of unquestioned obedience blurred personal responsibility. making it easier for atrocities to be carried out without hesitation. After the war, prosecutors faced enormous challenges. Linking an individual to a specific atrocity was difficult. Many officers and bureaucrats were implicated only indirectly, and without concrete evidence, trials often could not proceed. By 1949, global priorities had shifted. West Germany had become a key ally against the Soviet Union. Stability and reconstruction often outweighed exhaustive justice. Former Nazis were quietly reintegrated into government, business, and civil service. The scale of participation was staggering. Millions had taken part in some capacity, from frontline units to clerks processing transport lists. Even the most motivated legal system could not prosecute everyone involved. The machinery of crime had been vast. The machinery of justice, necessarily limited. Was the failure to punish all perpetrators negligence? Strategic necessity? Or a moral compromise born of political expediency? While history remembers the trials of the top leaders, it also preserves the countless names that never appeared in a courtroom. Names still recorded on orders, stamps, and signatures, silent witnesses to their deeds. Even after the war ended, the consequences of these orders continued to echo through the lives of those who survived. Survivors told stories of officers who organized deportation trains, coordinated mass shootings, or managed administrative logistics. Men who later returned to ordinary lives without ever facing trial. Letters and testimonies describe the shock of seeing former perpetrators quietly reintegrated into society, sometimes working in government offices, law firms, or businesses. One survivor recalled receiving a letter from a distant relative who had been transported to a camp. The bureaucrat who signed the papers had survived, alive and unpunished, while entire families had been erased. These accounts bring the human cost into sharp focus. The deaths, the suffering, the shattered communities, all were the direct result of decisions made in offices and meeting rooms far from the front lines. Each story underscores the moral gravity of obedience. Each document and signature represents lives lost, families destroyed, and a justice system stretched beyond its limits. For the survivors, the war did not end in 1945. The trauma, grief, and memory continued, and for many, justice was incomplete, leaving questions that still haunt history today. The story of these officers is not just about the past, it's about the lessons we carry forward. Their escape from justice reveals how systems can protect individuals even when their actions are criminal. Bureaucracy, military hierarchy, and political priorities all created an environment where obedience could override morality. Legal constraints and the sheer scale of participation made comprehensive accountability nearly impossible. This history raises questions that remain relevant today. How far can a person go when following orders? When does loyalty become complicity? And how does society ensure that justice reaches those responsible, even when the machinery of crime is vast? The Nuremberg Trials set an important precedent. Just following orders is not a defense for crimes against humanity. Yet the uneven enforcement demonstrates that law, politics, and practicality often collide, leaving some perpetrators free while others pay the ultimate price. The lessons are clear. Vigilance, moral courage, and accountability are essential in preventing atrocities. History shows what happens when bureaucracy masks evil, when obedience replaces conscience, and when political expediency outweighs justice. Understanding this is not just about remembering the past. It is about recognizing the choices we all face in systems of power and the consequences when responsibility is ignored. Even after the trials, many who orchestrated mass during World War II walked free. Their signatures, their orders, their decisions, all remained documented, yet they returned to quiet lives. Some continued careers in government, business, and law. Others faded into anonymity. Meanwhile, survivors carried the memory of loss, grief, and injustice. The world saw justice delivered to some, but for countless others, the law fell short. This is the paradox of history. Great crimes executed with meticulous precision and yet imperfect justice in their wake. It forces us to reflect on obedience, responsibility, and the cost of silence. When we remember the officers who were never punished, we confront uncomfortable truths about human nature, the machinery of power, and the moral compromises societies make in the aftermath of atrocity. As we close this chapter, consider this. History preserves not only the actions of the guilty, but also the gaps in justice. Those gaps are lessons in accountability and reminders that vigilance and moral courage are needed long after the final signature is signed. Next, we will explore the hidden networks that helped former SS officers disappear after 1945, and how they shaped post-war Europe in ways many never realized. If you found this story revealing, hit like and subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. Comment below. Do you think justice was ever truly served after World War II? We want to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to check out our next video where we uncover the secret networks that allowed former SS officers to vanish into post-war Europe. A story of escape, reinvention, and hidden influence that history almost forgot. Click the notification bell to join us as we continue exploring the untold stories of World War II and the people who shaped them.